At my husband's funeral, my son Daniel stood at the podium with a trembling voice and thanked another woman. He said she was the one who was truly family to us. In that moment, every eye in the room turned to the woman in the front row. The one in the fitted dress, perfect makeup and delicate tears resting in her eyes. The real wife and mother sat off to the side, unnoticed, invisible. Later, when the lawyer informed me that my husband had left everything to her and not a single dime to me, Linda Mallister hugged my son and smiled a triumphant smile, as if she had already won. But then I pulled out the second will, and just like that, no one in the room was smiling anymore. I never imagined my life would begin anew at a funeral. Robert died in a sudden car accident. He was driving downtown that morning in heavy rain. They said the brakes failed on a curve and the car crashed into a supermarket. He was gone instantly. The doctor said he didn't suffer, but I wasn't sure he deserved such a clean exit. We had been married for 40 years. I used to think our marriage, while not romantic, was at least solid, like an old house weathered by storms, worn on the outside but still standing. I gave up my career to tend to every corner of our home. He always said, "I can take care of you. You don't need to work." And I believed him. I naively thought that was a form of love. At the memorial, I wore his favorite charcoal gray wool coat and stood by the chapel entrance, greeting guests. The wind whipped around me, and my fingers were numb. Still, I smiled, doing my best to make sure his farewell was dignified and orderly. Robert cared so much about appearances, about what people thought of him. Even in his death, I found myself maintaining that neat facade for him. Daniel was at the podium. He's our only child. He turns 33 this year and works as a back-end engineer for a tech company. He wore a sharp, dark suit, his face solemn, his voice as steady as always. After reading a tribute to his father, he paused, and his eyes reddened. "There's someone I want to give a special thank you to," he said, his voice a little shaky. The room fell silent. I clutched my handbag in my lap, my knuckles turning white. I thought he was about to say, "My mother." In that moment, I could almost hear it forming in his throat, that long-awaited acknowledgement. 40 years of companionship, dedication to the home, nights spent at the hospital, all the quiet sacrifices. I truly believed he had finally seen me. But what he said next sliced through me like a dull blade, stripping that hope away inch by inch. Someone who supported my father through the toughest time of his life. Miss Linda Mallister. A soft murmur moved down the aisle. From the front row, a woman stood up and dabbed her eyes, nodding politely. She wore a deep emerald wool coat, black heels, flawless makeup, and perfectly styled hair. As she sat down, people around her looked on, curious and surprised. I felt silence roar through my ears. Linda Mallister. I knew the name. She was Robert's administrative assistant at the firm. He later promoted her to consulting partner, even briefly included her on the board. When I asked about her, he always downplayed it. "She's competent. Don't be paranoid." I remembered the company party that year. She brought me wine, smiling sweetly, moving with the ease of someone who belonged. I dismissed her then as just another sycophantic employee. Looking back now, how ironic. From across the room, someone whispered, "She's sitting so close, like she's family." And my son, had just thanked that woman at his father's funeral. I felt like the chair had dropped out from under me. My ears rang, and the world vibrated faintly. People came up to shake my hand, murmuring the usual phrases. "He was a good man. We'll miss him." I nodded automatically, like a machine repeating pre-programmed responses. I had planned to hold on until the end to maintain appearances. But then I heard Daniel whisper to Linda, "You're the one who's truly family." I nearly dropped the teacup in my hand. In that moment, I realized this funeral wasn't for Robert. It was for a hidden world I never knew existed, and I was just a stranger, an unwanted observer. That night, back home, I sat in the empty living room, As I took off the coat, I saw the satin ribbon was wrinkled, as if the last remnant of my marriage's dignity had been accidentally crushed. I sat at the dining room table and stared at the row of empty chairs. Robert's seat was still in its place. I hadn't moved it. For decades, he'd always sat there, hand on the armrest, waiting for me to bring him his soup. Now it sat alone, the armrest cold. There were still bottles of his favorite beer in the fridge. I never liked the brand. It was too bitter. But he'd buy a six-pack every week just for himself. Turns out habit is the cruelest prison. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out old photo albums. In the photos, we were still young. There was light in his eyes. I smiled easily back then. I even found an old employee ID from when I was a financial consultant at his firm. Short hair, confident. Always seated second from the right at every board meeting. Then he told me, "You should quit. I'll take care of everything." And I foolishly listened. I closed the album and poured myself a glass of water. The kitchen clock ticked. I realized all the pride and patience I had poured into keeping our marriage intact had been buried with him. What I didn't know, however, was that beneath all of this was a deeper betrayal. The next morning, every word I heard in the lawyer's office felt like a line from a script of a life I had never been invited to read. The air smelled faintly of ink and old wood cabinets. A faded print of the Constitution hung crooked on the wall, and sunlight filtered through the blinds, slicing the floor into thin strips of light. It was the law firm Robert had designated before his death. The lead lawyer was a man in his 50s with a slow, heavy voice. Every syllable was drawn out, as if something unspoken lurked beneath each word. "Pursuant to the will signed by Mr. Robert Des Smith 3 years ago," he began calmly, "the majority of his assets, including the main residence in Summerall, the vacation property in Nantucket, and the remaining balance of his personal accounts, shall be inherited by Ms. Linda Mallister." I wasn't just stunned. I felt as if I'd been pushed off the main stage of my own life and left behind the curtain in a dead spotlight, unsure if I had ever truly played the role I thought belonged to me. I turned to look at Daniel. He sat upright, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed forward like he was listening to a quarterly financial report. His fingers were perfectly interlocked. Not a flicker of surprise, not a single shift in his expression. It was as if he had known everything already. When the reading ended, I stood and walked over to him. "You knew," I said, my voice low and trembling. "Didn't you?" He looked at me with unsettling calm. "Dad had his reasons." "His reasons?" I whispered, the words almost choking me. What did 40 years of marriage mean to him? Daniel hesitated, then said, "He worked hard his whole life. Linda was there for him. She understood him." He lowered his voice almost apologetically. "You didn't." In that moment, the truth was unmistakable. I hadn't just lost my husband. I was losing my son. He wasn't defending his father's memory. He was redrawing the family tree and erasing me from it. When I arrived home, I stood in the driveway for what felt like forever, the weight of my handbag numbing my arm. I went into the bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His shirts, ties, and wool vests were still perfectly arranged, carrying that faint scent of polished dignity. But what lies were woven into those fibers? When did he decide I was no longer family? Was it the year I forgot to buy his favorite wine for our anniversary? Or earlier, when I quit my job as his financial consultant and reduced myself to a housewife? I started digging through drawers, searching for proof that I wasn't imagining things. Old ledgers, photos, receipts, business cards. In a kitchen drawer, I found a folder of letters Robert had kept. One was from the Nantucket Property Management Company. The date was 6 years ago. The recipient was Linda. My hands trembled. I had visited that house by the sea countless times, never realizing I was only a guest. That afternoon, I walked across the street to see our longtime neighbor, Giselle. She was a widow in her late 70s, sharp-minded with a garden full of roses. When I mentioned Linda's name, her face tightened. Linda? Wasn't she the one Robert used to take to those symphonies? she asked, raising an eyebrow. You didn't go with them? I forced a smile. My mouth was dry. I never liked social events much. Giselle shifted in her seat. Oh, I always thought they were an item. She's been on this street several times. One year she even helped Robert put up the Christmas lights. I froze. That Christmas I'd been upstairs with a swollen knee. Robert had told me a neighborhood boy helped him. Do you remember when they started getting close? I asked. Giselle stirred her tea, thinking. At least 10, maybe 15 years ago. I remember seeing her around when you were away taking care of your sister. I assumed she was some relative. 15 years. I sat in her sunroom feeling like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. All those years, I had managed our retirement budget down to the last penny. I chose his bathrobes, scheduled his physicals, even dipped into my parents' last savings to rescue his company during a cash crisis. And all the while he had been building a golden future for another woman. Behind my back, beyond my reach. When I got home, I finally found an old cardboard box in the basement filled with photos. There was Robert standing next to Linda at a company event. His hand rested gently on her arm, his smile bright, brighter than I'd seen in years. He looked relaxed, younger, happier than he ever looked beside me. And in one photo, there was Daniel, barely 18 or 19, standing with them. His smile was nervous but not unwilling. One corner of the photo had been blacked out. I rubbed it gently with an eraser and uncovered a handwritten note. Our little family will be official one day. I could almost hear something crack inside me. It wasn't my heart. It wasn't glass. It was something deeper. Trust. And it would never be whole again. That night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. For the first time in that house without Robert, I put on music. A slow, soft, unhurried jazz record. And I started to wonder, maybe I had lived my whole life to his rhythm and never once danced to my own. But not anymore. From now on, the music, the beat, the steps, that's mine to choose. I thought the worst was over. The will, the truth about the properties. Linda standing at the center of it all, brazenly labeled as family. That humiliation alone felt like enough for a lifetime. But I didn't realize the deepest cut would come from Daniel. He is my only child. I believed that no matter how unrecognizable the rest of the world became, he would still be mine. We agreed to meet at the town cafe, the one where he used to get caramel dessert as a little boy. He arrived in a trench coat, his demeanor stiff and formal, as if he were preparing for an interview, not meeting his mother. Before I could sit, he placed his phone face down on the table. He always did that, a silent signal that any buzz could end the conversation. "Why did you send Linda a legal notice?" he asked bluntly. I took a deep breath and looked him in the eye. "Do you think I shouldn't have?" He shrugged. "She didn't hurt you. Dad gave her the money. It was his decision. Suing her just makes everyone uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" I said, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Daniel, your father deceived me for decades. I gave up my career for this family, my friends, for you. I even sold my mother's emerald ring to pay your college tuition. Do you know what that ring meant to me?" Daniel frowned and exhaled like he was tired of hearing it. "You always bring it up like I owe you something." It hit me like a blunt strike to the chest. It wasn't anger. There was no argument, no fight. Just distance, a cold and final distance. Daniel paused before speaking, his tone subdued. "Dad told me the happiest years of his life were with Linda. She understood him. She respected him. She didn't constantly question and criticize him the way you did." "I questioned him because he stopped respecting me," I replied through clenched teeth. "I criticized him because he was wrong." Daniel shook his head like he was listening to something pointless. "You're too traditional, Mom. You've always believed sacrifice is a virtue, but Dad didn't want that kind of love." That's when it clicked. This wasn't something he had just realized. He'd been thinking like this for years, and only said it out loud now. I stared at my son, but all I could see was the child he used to be. The little boy gasping through asthma attacks while I sat beside his bed all night. The teenager bullied at school whose pride I defended fiercely. The heartbroken 17-year-old who curled up next to me on the backyard bench in silence until the stars came out. Did he remember any of that? I reached into my purse and pulled out an old faded photograph. That summer when you were 2, we went to the beach, I said, sliding it across the table. Your father bailed at the last minute because of work, so it was just us. In the picture, he's wearing bright red swim trunks, standing on wet sand, tiny wobbly footprints trailing behind him. You were terrified of the waves. You clung to my neck and screamed, "Mommy, Mommy!" The world didn't make sense to you yet, but you knew where safety was. Daniel looked down silently. I know you idolize your father, I said. He was always well-dressed, calm, said the right thing. But did you ever consider that I laid the groundwork for that polished man to exist? He looked up. There were no tears, no guilt, just a hint of uncertainty. Dad did what made him happy, he said. Linda made him feel needed. You were just too strong, too strong. That's what I was. My mind flashed through the nights I balanced overdue bills, the afternoons I cooked while running a fever, the years I swallowed tears at Robert's cold silences and smiled anyway. That's what he meant by strong. I slipped the photo back into my wallet and stood. My voice was calm but edged with resolve. You're right. I was too strong. And starting today, I'll use that strength for myself. Whatever he said after that, I didn't hear. I walked out of the cafe into the parking lot. Rain had started, drops tapping against the windshield in a slow, steady rhythm that sounded like silence given form. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, and paused. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just sat there, realizing that what I'd lost wasn't only a husband. I had lost a marriage, a family, even my son. But in that same breath, I understood something else. I couldn't wait for someone else to define me anymore. It was time to live for myself. At first, I thought Linda was just a late intrusion in Robert's life, an opportunist who slipped through a crack. But now I saw it clearly. She was never accidental. She had planned everything. One rainy afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and pulled up her public Facebook profile. Her profile picture showed her on a beach, smiling softly. The background artfully blurred as if she didn't want anyone to see what was really behind her. Her bio read, consultant in the architecture sector, lover of classical music and community service, grateful for life's gentle company. I opened her photo albums. The first image showed Robert sitting in a wicker chair holding a slice of lemon pie she had made for him. Her caption said, "His smile is my favorite reward." The date was 6 years ago, the same year I was bedridden with arthritis. He had told me then that work was overwhelming, and he'd be traveling a lot. I believed him. I thought he was avoiding the burden of caring for me, but now I knew he wasn't running from responsibility. He was living a second life without me. I kept scrolling and found more photos that were both familiar and foreign. Robert in her living room wearing the wool jacket I bought him. Robert helping her plant flowers and arrange bonsai in her garden. Then a video appeared. Robert was raising a toast while a Christmas song played in the background. And Daniel was there. I froze, my hand suspended over the touchpad. Daniel was still in college then. His hair slightly longer, his face boyish and shy. Linda had her arm around his shoulders and said with a laugh, "Your dad should be proud of you." That's when I understood. Linda wasn't just Robert's secret. She had been weaving herself into our family for years, and I was the woman she intended to replace. I called Ruth. Ruth Lanier had been a close colleague when I worked at Robert's firm. One of the few women I stayed in touch with after leaving. She was semi-retired now, helping her daughter with a grandchild and taking occasional freelance financial cases. She picked up on the second ring, her voice full of the same energy she always had. "Maggie, my goodness, I heard about Robert. I've been meaning to call." "Thank you," I said. I didn't delay. "Ruth, I need you to help me find something." She didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you think is going on." I paused, my voice steady and clear. I believe Robert used company funds over at least the last 10 years to buy properties for Linda, and there may be more unaccounted transfers. Ruth went silent for a moment. You're not just mending a marriage, Maggie. You're trying to uncover fraud. I want the truth, I said. I've lived too long in the dark. We agreed to meet at her house in 2 days. In the meantime, I turned into a woman with a purpose. I went to the local library and searched property records in Summerball under Linda's name. One home, a single-family villa, purchased 5 years ago, right at the end of the company's employee housing benefits project, the same one Robert was managing. I had visited during that project and joked, "Next time, you take me too." He dodged it. You wouldn't like it there. Now I knew that room wasn't for clients. It was for her. 2 days later, I drove to Ruth's house. She lived in a quiet suburb, a pale gray bungalow with withering chrysanthemums lining the front. She greeted me with a glass of lemon tea and opened her laptop. "I checked some archived payment records," she said, scrolling to 3 entries listed as outside consulting support. "But the company receiving the payments is a shell. No physical office anywhere." She zoomed in on a line. $50,000. Paid the same month you were home recovering from surgery. My stomach tightened. Ruth peered at me over her glasses, concern in her eyes. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Most people would rather let it go. I didn't respond. I just saved a screenshot of the file to my flash drive. On the drive home, I moved slowly. The sunlight hit the windshield hard, and the air carried the smell of early autumn. An old ballad from the 60s was playing on the radio. The chorus repeated softly. "You only find the truth when you stop pretending." Yes, only when you stop pretending can you truly see. When I got home, I sat in front of the computer and saved Linda's Facebook photos into a new folder. I titled it Evidence. I was no longer the woman who hid her feelings behind a stove. I was Maggie Smith, Robert's legal wife, Daniel's mother, the person erased from her own life story, and the woman who was about to rewrite the ending. The second set of documents from Ruth arrived just as I was wiping down the kitchen sink. Sunlight came through the blinds in clean stripes across the counter. I paused with the rag in my hand and thought about how my marriage had been maintained. Tidy, quiet, until the kitchen no longer felt like mine. The email subject was direct. 3 suspicious transactions. Key preliminary legal feasibility assessment. I opened it. A few familiar PDF statements appeared on the screen. Ruth had annotated them. The company name, Quinte Consulting LLC. The account linked to Linda. The transfers totaled more than $350,000, spread across 5 years, each one timed just outside the company's official audit cycles. She left a note. "This sum lacks sufficient justification. Unless invoices showing services of equivalent value can be produced, this is potentially a fraudulent gift." There it was. Proof. A hard knot of resolve formed in my chest. I knew exactly what to do. That afternoon, I called a lawyer who specialized in fraud and corporate law. "I have a whole host of questions," I said, my voice steady. "I believe my late husband systematically siphoned company funds to support his longtime mistress." The lawyer was Michelle Robinson. She sounded like a woman in her mid-50s, warm but direct. She listened calmly. "You need to send me everything you have," she said. "Every document, every email, every photo." I hung up and started copying files. By the time I finished, I had over 50 documents. I printed them all, organized them neatly in a folder, and brought them to her downtown office. The firm was in a glass skyscraper, and I looked out at the Chicago skyline as I waited. When she walked in, she wore a well-tailored suit and a sharp haircut that framed her chin. She greeted me with a kind, professional smile, took the folder, flipped through it, and nodded. "We'll go through this," she said. "I'll be in touch." "Thank you," I told her. "She betrayed me and my son helped her. I want her to pay back every last cent." Michelle pushed her glasses up. We'll do our best. The next few months were a whirlwind of appointments, emails, and legal proceedings. We filed a lawsuit against Linda Mallister, and the case drew attention. Robert's former firm, his lawyer, and even his estate were pulled into it. And then there was Daniel. He sided with Linda. He was furious. "You're destroying his memory," he said over the phone. "Daniel, your memory of your father is a fairy tale." I told him. He was a con man who used money to betray me, his wife and the mother of his son. "That's the truth." He hung up. I waited for him to call back, but he didn't. It hurt, but I continued anyway. I had to. The case went to court. Linda and her lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding. They claimed the money was for consulting services. They produced fake invoices Robert had given her, but we had Ruth's findings and Robert's own Facebook photos. I took the stand and told the story. I spoke about our 40-year marriage, the sacrifices I made for him and for Daniel, and the pain I felt when I uncovered the truth. The judge, a black woman in her mid-60s, watched me with understanding. I think she knew what lives inside women like me. In the end, she ruled in our favor. Linda was ordered to return everything Robert had given her, plus interest. The total was more than $1 million. She had to sell the properties bought with the stolen funds. She lost her job and her reputation. I never saw her again. As for Daniel, he didn't speak to me for years. Then when my father died, he called. We met at the funeral and embraced. We started seeing each other again. I told him everything, and he slowly began to understand. It took time, but we repaired our relationship. He apologized and said he had been defending an illusion all along. I hugged him and told him I had always believed in him. There were many tears that day. Daniel hugged me gently. "Mom," he said with a small smile. "When did you get so good at giving speeches?" I smiled back. "I always was." "You just weren't listening." We both laughed. Everyone laughed. Before the gathering ended, I took a short walk in the garden. I paused in front of the crabapple tree I planted 20 years earlier. "Last year, this nearly died," I said. "I almost cut it down. But this spring, it bloomed earlier than ever, and it's still blooming." The women around me chuckled. I added, "Even she knew that what's still alive shouldn't be given up on." That night, after everyone left, I folded the chairs and put them away in the shed. The wind chime on the porch tinkled softly in the breeze. I turned to watch the sunset. It rested above the old maple tree at the end of the street, as if asking, "Who are you really?" I took off my heels, walked barefoot into the house, hung up my dress, and went to bed. I knew who I was now. I was a survivor, a fighter, and the truth had finally set me free.